11 deals with communicating effectively, whilst 12 deals with enhancing quality. Now, 11 has 5 standards, namely from 11.1 to 11.5, dealing with building relationships and communicating with stakeholders. Effective communication itself, communicating the results, errors and omissions, how to deal with them, communicating the acceptance of risks, right? Now, in 12, we delve into internal quality assessment, the performance measurements criteria, and then overseeing and improving engagement results. So let's delve into the requirements of standard 11, the standards, relating to principle 11. And whilst doing that, we also delve into examples of how we show conformance with the requirements of the standard. Next slide, please, if you can kindly move on to the next slide. Great, thanks so much. So standard 11.1, that relates to communicating effectively under principle 11, requires that the CEA, the Chief Audit Executive, must lead the internal audit function to build trust and relationship with stakeholders. Secondly, the Chief Audit Executive must promote formal and informal communication between the internal audit function and stakeholders. This is principally important because it promotes a mutual understanding of the organization's interests, strategies, and concerns, right? In addition to that, the approaches for risk identification and management is enhanced and understood. It also assigns roles and responsibilities and opportunities for collaboration in managing these, and then enhances understanding of regulatory requirements and also the significant processes, including financial reporting, which informs the hows and the what's to audit. Now, I dare say that one of the challenges that impacts internal auditors is one of communication. And as you all know, effective communication involves the exchange of ideas, thoughts, opinions, knowledge, and in the case of internal auditors, observations and insights that get shared with respect to the audit engagements that we undertake, right? And those must be communicated in a manner that ensures that the message that we are communicating is understood with clarity and purpose. And of course, the hallmark of any effective communication is that both parties leave feeling a sense of satisfaction after the process. Now, to communicate effectively, auditors need to build relationship and trust to enable stakeholders benefit from the results of the internal audit services. There's also, very important that as auditors, we hold regular and ongoing communications with our stakeholders, right? That enables a common understanding of the organization's risk and assurance requirements, right? Now, apart from understanding the organization's risk and assurance requirements, it also enhances internal audit agility in responding to changes in the organization's circumstances. Apart from that, it is important that the internal audit head, that's the Chief Audit Executive, is included in communications and communication channels across the organizations, right? Now, it's not just for the sake of, including the internal audit head, but it also ensures that the CAE and the entire audit function, because the intention actually is not just to provide the chief audit executive with information, but the information should also be cascaded down to the entire internal audit function, right? So that being included in the communication channel ensures that the CAE and the internal audit function is aware of major changes or planned activities that impact the objectives and risks of the organization as a whole. So typically, issues such as planned mergers and acquisitions is one area that, is very important to have information shared on with the chief audit executive. System integrations, because these tend to have very, very significant impact on the control environment and control activities of the organization. Now, significant complex transactions, which also have regulatory and tax implications, are also ones that, tends to be shared in those communication channels. And then last but not the least, products and services development. These, especially in my area, are ones that tend to have very, very significant impact on the control activities, control environment, customer experience, which internal audit needs to be abreast with to be able to couch our assurance and consulting activities to provide the board and senior management assurance and insights required to improve governance, risk, and control processes. Now, internal audits, like I said, should be aware of all such changes to plan assurance and consulting engagements appropriately. Now, beyond inclusion in communications, it is very, very important in enforcing the requirement of Standard 11.1 that the chief audit executive has a seat at the table, right, of the board and also the executive management of the organization, right? It is very, very critical to, to execute a mandate of internal audit for the chief audit executive to have, a seat at the table. And it's not just at the executive committee meetings, but also a seat at the table for all governance-related committees that are formed in the organization, because it provides a very important avenue for information and insight around the risk exposures of the business and how the business plans to initiate action to mitigate those, I would say, risks, right? Now, the chief audit executive should also discuss reporting protocols, right, and methodology with the board and senior management. And this typically covers matters covering the criteria for defining what constitutes a significant issue that requires escalation, right? Information requirements in the organization, I would recommend, and it is actually best practice, that it is layered, right, to ensure that the information needs of each party is tailored to enable them perform the functions to which they have been appointed to. So typically the board gives directional guidance. So it would be too much to overburden the board with the details of an audit finding. But that said, you need to approach reporting to the board with circumspection, taking into consideration the exact requirements of your board. Some board members, like to delve into the details. If your sense is that your board is one that requires such details, just go ahead and provide those details to them, right? But best practice is that you tailor the information needs to their requirements. So typically you provide them with a high-level information, highlighting the risk exposures and exactly what management is doing to manage those risks, especially from your findings, right? Now, as we'll see later in the requirement of standard 11.4, when it comes to escalating acceptance of risks that are deemed to be beyond the risk-bearing capacity of the organization, it's also important that you take certain consideration in sharing such information with the board. Right. Now, in executing a requirement of standard 11.1, it's also very important that you kindly stay on 11.1. We will not move yet. We'll move very quickly into the slides, but just give me some time to deal with the requirements of 11.1. Right. In executing a requirement of 11.1, it's also very important that as the chief audit executive, right, and it's very important as chief audit executive to also move along with your team to build capacity. So it's not, don't take it as one that requires only action from the chief audit executive. Although the CAE leads, strategically and tactically in achieving the requirements, right? So there is a need for a meeting independently with individual executives and board members. What this does actually, apart from facilitating relationship building and trust, it also enables the chief audit executive and the internal audit staff to gauge the pain points, right, of management and the board of directors, right, which enables internal audit to pick up on their perspectives and, infuse them in considering the internal audit response by way of audit engagements and consulting activities. Now, I would recommend that, you hold periodic meetings with your external auditors if you're not doing so currently, because it also, and I would say not just internal auditors, but also extend beyond your external auditors to all other assurance providers, whether internal or external, right? So if you have a business unit in your business that provides separate evaluations and self-assessments to first-line management, kindly have periodic meetings with them. It ensures that there's perspective sharing, and you also reduce the cost of, first of all, you reduce redundancies and duplications in the assurance efforts, and in so doing, you reduce the cost of assurance, right? Now, those meetings also enables the chief audit executive to consider a broader base of information in concluding on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the internal control environment, because you will, as head of internal audit, required in most instances to provide a view, at least on an annual basis, of how effective and adequate the internal control environment is, and any movement, therefrom on a periodic basis, right, to the board, right, to give them assurance that the governance, risk, and controls processes are working to mitigate the risks of the organization, right? Now, in achieving all this, I would say that, even if you are Hercules as chief audit executive, you can't do it alone, right? So consider delegating or assigning some of your senior auditors the responsibilities of maintaining ongoing communications with management of key business, functions as a single point of contact. But however, notice that this does not take away from you as head of internal audit the responsibility for ensuring that there is effective communication, right? Now, what I have realized in my professional life is that it provides significant opportunities, right, for developing your staff and keeping them engaged to perform extraordinarily well in achieving the objectives or executing the mandate of the internal audit function. Now, beyond senior management as well, my recommendation is that you build opportunities for your function to meet informally with the wider staff, right? Now, this builds trust. It enables auditors gain, comprehensive understanding of the organization's control environment, right? Especially the culture operating systems of the organization. Mind you, not everything is documented in policies and procedures, right? It is your culture operating systems that give effect to your policies, procedures, and processes, right? By a point of caution is that in pursuing informal engagement, you must give consideration to the fact that your auditor's objectivity may be impaired as a result of relationship building. So you should consider rotating such staff if you have them leading, the informal communications. Because what you should not be doing is sacrificing the objectivity of internal auditors on the altar of stakeholder engagement, right? You need to set ground rules and boundaries for such engagements with respect to the house and expectations of outcomes for these engagements. Because there is an adage that says that familiarity kills the cat. So let's be mindful of that, right? Now, with respect to evidence of conformance, kindly scroll down to the bottom page. Hello, Brenda.
Yes, Eric will do that.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
You may have to reduce the screen size a bit. If not, I will take it up from here. Just a minute, please. Great. Okay. So in evidencing conformance with the requirement of this particular standard, it is important that as internal audit functions, we develop, a formal stakeholder management plan, right? So you know who your key stakeholders are, develop a plan of engaging them periodically, monthly, quarterly, to discuss key issues, that moves the key issues that moves the boundaries with respect to internal control deficiencies, right? By so doing, essentially what they see is that you are in the game with them. You're concerned about they achieving their objectives, right? And it creates the bond required for them to not only embrace internal audit, but also act as ambassadors actually for the internal audit function, right? Another point that you could use as evidence of conformance would be the agendas of meetings between the internal audit function and your stakeholders. We do have surveys, interviews, and facilitated workshops to solicit input from our stakeholders. Those formalized documents tend to also be evidence that we are conforming with the requirements of standard 11.1. Now, last but not the least, formalized channels of communications with at stakeholders, be it newsletters and periodicals, presentations that we provide for insights, right? And then websites and web pages that, you know, we churn out communications about internal controls, efficiencies, and best practices on how to instill control discipline or improve processes, you know, broadly across the business, also serves as evidence of conformance to standard 11.1. So moving on to standard 11.2. The chief auditing executive, right, is required to establish and implement methodologies that promotes accurate, objective, clear, concise, constructive, complete, and timely communications by the internal audit function. I mean, it's a journey, right? And I would say that most internal audit functions, you know, achieve most, potentially all, right? But there still are considerations for improvements, you know, at any point in time, right? Now, the methodologies may include policies, criteria or style guides, right? And then procedures that, you know, the internal audit function institutes to guide internal audit communications and achieve consistency, right? Now, I would say an audit function has arrived in achieving these requirements when your stakeholders can hold brief for you if there is a communication that did not emanate from internal audit function. Your stakeholders can say that, no, this particular communication falls short of the standards of communication from the internal audit function. Because what it means is that you have actually set up a process and internalized that process to the extent that it shows, you know, outwardly in your communications. Now, communication methodologies that you set up should also consider the expectations of the board and senior management and relevant, you know, stakeholders as regards, you know, the qualities of information that should be communicated, right? And it's also, in so doing, chief audit executives should consider instituting training regimes and schedules for internal auditors, of course, based on the auditor's needs assessments, right? But I mean, when it comes to effective communication, it is one that you can never really say, you know, you are a master of. There is always the need for continuous improvement. So as chief audit executives, my recommendation is that let's make sure that, you know, we up the game for our teams and ourselves, right, in communicating effectively, right? Now, we should also institute supervisory reviews, which ensures that the requirements, right, of accuracy all the way to timely communication is evidenced in the ways of work. So by accuracy, what we mean is that the communication should be free from error and distortions and be supported by the underlying facts, right? I have encountered situations where, you know, auditors wanting not to be outdone, you know, or avoid expectation gaps, include corridor talks in the audit reports, right? That is a no-no, right? So your review mechanism should ensure that all information that gets included in the final audit or the draft report itself is supported by verifiable facts, right? Because if not, the entire function would have eggs on their faces. And I can assure you that there are some auditees out there who will gleefully just push and probe or prod auditors to include certain information. And if you as an auditor, you don't take the chance of ensuring that that information is validated and corroborated by the information that you have, reviewed, this person will just turn around and, take you to the cleaners and make aspersions as to the professionalism and effectiveness of internal audit overall, right? Now, when we say information should be objective, it means it should be impartial, it should be unbiased, and the result of a fair and unbalanced assessment of all relevant facts and circumstances. I mean, it relates to the qualities of accuracy as well. But what it means also is that you should be very objective in your assessment of the underlying records, devoid of partiality. It is said that if you actually search out for something, you will see it, right? And I can assure you, depending on how you frame your questions, you can actually validate, particular responses, right, that you set out to achieve. So let's be objective in our communications. It should also be clear, logical, easily understood by relevant stakeholders, and you should avoid unnecessary technical language. Now, if you use language which is inconsistent with industry terminology, right, or your organization itself, you need to ensure that you, define them, right? Because see, I work in the technology environment, right, and in telecoms, there are lots of mnemonics, right, or short forms of this, right? So when you put in right of way, right, and you just say ROW, right, it may mean something else to the network team, may mean something else to the IT team. So you need to be very, very clear and, logical in using terminology, right? Because if not, you actually lead yourself up to a lot of contentions. You also need to define important terms that are, not common to your industry, as I did indicate, and then provide sufficient detail to support your findings, conclusions, or agreed actions, right? It is very, very important that, contextually, an unrelated but reasonably qualified auditor lands on the same conclusions, as you did, reviewing the underlying records and also your communication, right? So you should not overly, right, summarize your information, right? And you should give enough information, as I indicated, to enable the users of your reports take the required actions of them, right? Our report or communication should also be concise and free from unnecessary detail. Let's avoid redundancies and exclude unnecessary information that are not related to the engagement or service in question, right? Sometimes you chance upon reports and the information is so winding that you lose the import of the communication that's sent, right? Let's keep it concise and simple. And then overall, also ensure that it is constructive. This is one of the areas that, in my experience, internal auditors have had a lot of issues with auditees, right? In that the communication tends to be very personalized. You did this. No, right? Let's make sure that we express information in a very cooperative way. The intention is to ensure that we elicit action, right, and not emotion, right? We avoid personalization of observations and gaps, and your words should be centered in such a way that if it is poison, the recipient of your report should drink it and say thank you, right? I do understand that our brothers and sisters from Ekwapim can actually, insult you respectfully, and you end up saying thank you. So let's emulate, our relatives and brothers and sisters from Ekwapim. We should also be sharing information that is complete, right? It is relevant, reliable, and sufficient, and evidence to support the results of the audits that, we undertake. And completeness, in actual fact, enables a reader to reach the same conclusion that you reached in performing the audit. We should also adapt our comms to the needs of the recipients. I mean, I can't overemphasize this enough, right? Because Mr. A, Michael needs information as CAE to perform a unique function. The auditee or the executive of the functional unit also needs information for a particular purpose, right? And the control owner also needs information for a particular purpose. So let's make sure that, we communicate completely, right, to meet the various needs of the auditees or users of our reports and communications. In timeliness, it means that your report should be appropriately timed, your communication, right, to elicit the right response, right? Now, it is important that in so doing, we adopt the methodologies of Agile, right, in ensuring that we don't have, surprises at the end of the engagement. Don't hold your observations under your armpit or your chest, right, to surprise your team. Right? It is very, very important and value adding that whilst you see observations, you clarify and give the auditee the opportunity, right, to close the gaps before they become incidents that, brings the organization down in achieving its objectives, right? So it's very, very important that our communication is timely, right? And so if we are yet to adopt the Agile methodologies in internal auditing, let's make sure that we make the shift, right, gradually to perfect our communications and ways of work. To achieve or evidence conformance, as indicated on the slides, I will not touch on all of them. Let's make sure that our methodologies, templates, once again, or guidance facilitate effective communications. The final communications and other documents should be approved by the Chief Audit Executive. I mean, there is no brief for the Chief Audit Executive if a communication goes out and then you say, no, I'm not aware of it. Everything that goes out should be signed off by the Chief Audit Executive, even if you delegate the responsibility for publishing some of those communications. And I will say do so because in terms of delegating, because it actually, emboldens and develops your team members. There should also be records, evidencing timely communications, because, the timestamps and all that shows that when the communication was sent out, right? And then stakeholder surveys of the IIA function. right, should also evidence, because one of the things that you should survey your stakeholders on is the effectiveness of your communications. And then the outcomes of your quality assurance and improvement plans also serves as evidence of conformance. That said, let's move on to the next principle, evidence that's communicating the results. The requirement is that the chief audit executive must periodically communicate results. And by this, the overall communication at the end of the year in terms of the performance of the business on its governance, risk, and controls processes, and also on its engagement, right? And this should be communicated to the board and the senior management. I would say senior management before the board, because those are the, the right protocols to adopt, right? And the chief audit executive must also understand the expectations of the board and senior management with respect to the nature and timing of communications, right? And the results of the internal audit services include engagement conclusions we spoke about, the themes, right, of the outcomes of engagement, whether they are ineffective controls, processes, or practices, and then the conclusions of the internal audit engagement, both at the business unit or the organizational unit level. So typically, you conclude on the control environment in a space you audited, and then on a periodic basis, based on your industry and regulatory requirements, whether annually, semi-annually, or quarterly, you provide an assessment at the organizational level, how the organization is managing its governance, risk, and controls processes to achieve its objectives, right? Now, in communicating results, it is important that as auditors, we're required that we share information to outside parties. We seek legal opinion, or if you work in a group structure like I do, where internal audit function is verticalized across all the footprint of MTN, right? You seek the insights, perspectives, and clearance, right, of your group audit executive. Unless, of course, you are complied by a law to release such information, right? Because by so doing, you avoid risk exposures to the business by releasing such information. Because it is important you understand the use to which that information is going to be put, right? So that you don't overly expose your business. You should also trend your findings and conclusions to facilitate insight sharing, right, about the evolution of the effectiveness of governance, risk, and controls processes for sharing with senior management and the board, right? Now, if you're sharing information only on engagement, it becomes very difficult to answer the question whether the organization is improving on its governance, risk, and controls objectives or retrogressing. But if you trend your findings on particular themes, you can take themes based on the structure of the organization, or themes based on critical risk exposures, right? To see how the organization itself is trending on, its improvement efforts, right? And whether it can leverage off its GRC processes to gain competitive advantage, right, over its industry. Now, trending could also be on thematic areas like I did indicate, on significant drivers of risk and business segments, and not forgetting the root causes of findings, right? And your conclusions on the overall effectiveness of the governance, risk, and controls processes must be supported by reliable and sufficient information and not on your gut feel. Please, if you have not evaluated a particular area of your business, feel free, don't be shy of indicating that these are areas that you have not, factually reviewed. And for that matter, you are excluding from your overall conclusions so that you base your overall conclusions on facts, right? But then, of course, if you have engaged broadly with different stakeholders in the assurance business, the external auditors, other internal assurance providers, right, including self-assessment by management, you can place reliance on those. You can feel free to include those in your conclusions on your overall control environment, right? Now, if you were to look at Prince or Standard 13.1, not necessarily the object of this discussion, right? Auditors are required to communicate on an ongoing basis the outcomes of their engagements until you issue the final report, right? But then the CA responsible under 11.3 to disseminate the final engagement communication to appropriate parties. And please, 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 I've often heard that audit reports tend to be exceptional reports. No, it needs to be a balanced report. So if there are satisfactory performances of controls, do include them in your report so that your report becomes balanced. Now, in so doing as well, you share best practices across the organizations or good practices that could promote improvement across the business. So don't shy away from including satisfactory performance in the areas that we audit, right? Now, in communicating to the board, we need to include significant control weaknesses, right? And the root causes and thematic issues, right? Including, things that evidence progress across multiple engagements, okay? And you should link your conclusions to their impact on the strategies and objectives of, the organizations, right? Including risks, right? You don't isolate the outcomes of your engagement because invariably we audit controls and processes which are implemented to manage risks assigned to strategic objectives and initiatives, right? So to add value, link your observations all the way up to the strategic objectives so that business sees that you're not auditing at variance with the expectations or objectives, right? So to evidence conformance, the final engagement communication itself is one that evidences conformance to 11.3, assuming that you have satisfied all the requirements, right? Now, included in there will be analysis of data and insights and diagrams that you picked up or prepared in finalizing your communications, and then relevant risk and control frameworks and other criteria that you use as a basis for the overall conclusion. If it is COSO, right, and for that matter, you review all the 5 pillars, right, in concluding on your overall control environment. You do so and indicate the basis for that. That said, we can quickly move on to principle standard 11.4, how we communicate errors and omissions. Internal auditors are not infallible, right? I mean, we do make mistakes, and the right thing to do is that when you do make a mistake, you stand up for it and correct the mistake, including making sure that the mistakes are not repeated, right? So the requirement is that where there is an error or omission, the chief audit executive must communicate the correct information promptly to all parties where a final engagement communication contained, significant error or an omission. And the chief audit executive must agree a criteria of what constitutes a significant error or omission with the board, right? And, significantly, this should be contained in the internal audit methodology of the procedures manual, right? Now, as I did say, you agree a protocol for communicating the corrections, whether you send the correction email on top of the original email to all parties, or you do so in a meeting setting, right? Those are the protocols that you need to engage based on the preferences of your board and senior management, right? And you should also, like I did indicate earlier on, in assessing significance of error or omission, you should consider whether the mistake or omission could have a legal or regulatory consequence, and whether it would change the findings, conclusions, and agreed action plans in the original communication. So if these circumstances are met, you should ensure that you kick in processes for correcting the error or omission, right? But it is very, very important that where people are going to rely on your communication, whether significant or not, to take decisions, you do the right and honorable things. If you come across any error or omission, to re-communicate the right information, right? I have spoken about choosing an appropriate channel, and then you also need to identify the cause of the error or omission, and then implement corrective action to prevent recurrence. And this you would likely, include in your quality assurance and improvement plan. To evidence conformance, formalize methodology for handling errors and omissions, like we just spoke about. The agreed criteria with the board, you include to determine what constitutes significant, you include in your operations manual. And then correspondence and other records supporting the process for determining significant or error or omission. And then of course, evidence that there is the original information, corrected information was communicated to the right people, right? And then the evidence that they received it, either through mail or whichever channel you elected to share that information. Okay, so to the last point under communicating effectively, that is communicating the acceptance of risks, right? Now, every organization, I would say, let me backtrack. Organizations with matured risk and compliance or risk management frameworks will usually set up a risk tolerance and acceptance process. Okay. Now, that would also be embedded in the organization's delegation of authority framework, right? And a process also for escalating risks beyond the tolerance levels across the organization and potentially all the way to headquarters if it is a group business, right? Now, as internal auditors, it is our mandate and responsibility to communicate to senior management and the board of directors where management is assuming risks beyond the risk tolerance or appetite of the organization. Now, our responsibility as auditors is restricted to communicating the details of the risk acceptance beyond the tolerance limit and not to correct the risk or manage the risk. Okay. So the first thing to take into consideration is to gain an understanding of the risk and tolerance framework or processes of the organization. Understand the organization's policy for risk acceptance, very, very important, right? You need to be on top of it, right? And then understand the organization's risk escalation policies and processes, okay? And then include in the internal audit methodology, the documentation of actions to be taken should management assume risks beyond the risk tolerance level. Now, how does management accept risks? Especially from internal audit perspective. The first one being that you issue a report, right? And management, nonchalantly tells you that no, they are not going to implement the findings. But then, from the work that you've done that we are sitting on a time bomb if management elects not to do anything about it. This is a perfect instance where you document the fact that management is accepting that risk. But before you get to the point of escalation, you should discuss the import of this with management. And of course, make them aware that you are going to escalate to the board or the audit committee to take the required action, okay? So the first point is on nonchalance or, not accepting audit findings. The second layer is the report has been agreed. Recommendations have been taken up, in the form of agreed remediation actions. But then when you follow up, you get a sense that there's a delay, right, of implementation of the findings, right? And, beyond the agreed remediation timelines. My recommendation is that set up a follow-up process such that you have enough opportunity to discuss with management any challenges they are facing with implementation of the agreed remediation action. In most cases, there may be budgetary challenges, there may be third-party interdependencies requiring extensive interaction before you conclude on a solution to the gap, right? And then, of course, sometimes, there is a misunderstanding of the agreed remediation action. And of course, sometimes, depending on who you are dealing with, they will not tell you they don't understand. Wait till the last minute and tell you that I'm not aware of this particular finding. Sometimes you can get very tricky auditees, right? So in your follow-up process, give yourself ample time so that you can pick up some of these challenges, right? Engage management for escalation to the board, right, for appropriate action. So if it is one that requires the board to flex its muscle, to tell management, no, there's a risk that we are not accepting, goes that route, it's the board's responsibility to remedy this. If it is that the board will sanction the release of funds, right, to enable the business invest in implementing solutions that would ensure those gaps are closed, please do so, right? So that the risk of the business will be mitigated, right? And by way of evidence, documentation of your discussions and agreements with the board on methodologies for communication of the risk concerns is very, very important. Documentation of discussions about the risk and actions, recommendations to operational management, very, very critical. Documentation explaining the risk concern and internal audit actions taken to address the concern, including the process of escalating the discussion from operational management to senior management. So you exhaust the escalation process before you get to the board, because if not, at the board meeting, you would have contentions between yourself and senior management. And then documentations from meetings with the board, including private or closed sessions, right, during which the concerns were escalated to the board, right? So if you have access to, it's not that if you should have access to the board meetings, you know, where the risk were escalated, so that if there is a quality review, you can show that as evidence of you conforming with the requirements of standard 11.5, right? Brenda, are we doing well on time? Okay, so let's move on quickly to principle 12, and then we can have some Q&A session. Okay. So principle 12 deals with enhancing quality, right? And 12.1 relates to internal quality assessment. As you all know, we have internal and external quality assessment. 12.1 deals with the requirements, specific requirements for internal quality assessments. And the requirement is that the chief audit executive must develop and conduct internal assessment of the internal audit functions conformance with the global internal audit standards and the progress towards performance objectives. Now, the chief audit executive must establish a methodology for internal assessments as described in standard 8.3 quality, which includes ongoing monitoring of the internal audit functions conformance with the standards and progress towards performance objectives, periodic assessments or assessments by other persons within the organization with sufficient knowledge of internal audit practices to evaluate conformance with the standard, and then communicate with the board and senior management about the results of internal assessments. So typically, what my expectation will be in achieving the requirements of 12.1 be that, first of all, we should have trained people within the organization, I mean the internal audit organization, that can perform reviews, right, of the internal audit function's performance against the requirements of the standard. Our methodologies, policies, and procedures should align with the requirements of the standard so that by performing work in accordance with our methodologies, we ab initio comply with the requirements of the standard, right? And then, of course, there should be ongoing evaluation, right? Not just by the group of people that you will appoint to perform quality reviews as champions, but it should be embedded in the ways of work at each gate, from planning all the way to archiving of the results, right? So typically from planning, you're making sure that the right risks have been considered, right? The right perspectives, you've included work from, or perspectives from risk management, other assurance providers, from your prior year working papers. And in actual fact, you are responding to the right risks, you know, whether inherent or not, right, in the process or business unit that you're reviewing, right? You should also make sure that you're building in the right teams with the right qualifications to perform the work. You have assigned adequate resources, right? And if it is that you've outsourced the engagement, you make sure that the outsourced service provider is qualified and has requisite skill sets to perform the reviews. With respect to execution, you're making sure that all the addressable risks are addressed. There are different or separate working papers for each of the items in the risk and controls matrices. Samples have been selected appropriately, right? If you are not adopting a continuous controls auditing regime, which affords you 100% review of the population that you're reviewing, right? Now, the conclusions from tests, right? And of course, you need to ensure that the right test procedures are applied before you arrive at the conclusions. The conclusions are ones that support the evidence that has been reviewed, right, and devoid of any biases or subjective elements, right? And in reporting, that's where you check in for the tone of the report, ensuring that everything that needs to be communicated has been communicated, included in the report, I should say, right? And then, of course, your verbiage is right and not one that would cause strife in the organization and deals with the right context, right? And then, of course, when it comes to closing off, all the documentation required has been included. The working papers have been completed before you archive your file, engagement files, right? So, of course, to evidence that, you need to ensure that you have completed checklists, documentation of completed periodic assessment that have been performed, right? And then presentations to the board where the results were communicated. And then, of course, actions that have been taken to improve the internal audit efficiency, effectiveness, and conformance with the standards in the quality assurance and improvement plan, right? But the takeaway is that the chief audit executive is responsible for the internal audit functions conformance with the global internal audit standards and continuous performance improvement. This cannot be delegated, right? Moving on to standard 2.2. The chief audit executive must develop objectives to evaluate the internal audit function's performance, right? The CAE should also consider the input and expectations of the board, senior management when developing the performance objectives. And then the chief audit executive must develop performance measurement methodology to assess progress towards achieving the functions objectives and to promote the continuous improvement of internal audit function. And then the chief audit executive must develop an action plan to address issues and opportunities for improvement. So this sits very deep at the heart of performance evaluation and improvement for the internal audit function.
Hello, Mr. Gbewonyo.
So the CAE should ensure that KPIs that are set for the internal audit function are ones that actually drive the performance of the business organization. I mean, the internal audit business organization, right? Ones that touches on the right actions that needs to be undertaken to promote the internal audit conformance with standards, right? And should be cascaded at the right level, right? With the CAE having overall responsibility with respect to achieving conformance with the standards, right? You cascade it down, right? Sorry. You cascade it down on the basis of the levels of involvement of your auditees or auditors, sorry, okay? So I will hold my senior managers responsible at a level that is tactical in implementing the requirements of the standard. So I would have requirements for achieving quality assurance objectives, right, in all auditors' KPIs. But then, of course, the weighting will be different to reflect their involvement, right? And what I typically do now is that requirement for quality assurance is actually a given, right, in the KPIs of all staff, right, weighted appropriately, right, and it's actually a gatekeeper. If you don't achieve requirement on quality, it actually affects all other, your overall KPI achievement, right? Because we're actually in the game because of our quality, okay? Now, the integrity and quality of internal audit for me is one that cannot be debated, right? You either achieve it or you don't, okay? And it is actually our reason for existence, our raison d'être. So if you don't achieve, unfortunately, requirements on quality, it affects the entirety of your KPIs, right? Or performance for the year, okay? And to the last point on enhancing quality, 12.3, the requirements are that the chief audit executive must establish and implement methodologies for engagement supervision, quality assurance, and the development of competencies, right? The chief audit executive or an engagement supervisor must provide internal auditors with guidance throughout the engagement, verify work programs are complete, and confirm engagement working papers adequately support findings, conclusions, and recommendations from the engagement, right? And then to assure quality, the chief audit executive must verify whether engagements are performed in conformance with standards and the internal audit functions methodologies. To develop competencies, the chief audit executive must provide internal auditors with feedback about their performance and opportunities for improvement. The chief audit executive must ensure that evidence of supervision is documented and retained according to the internal audit functions established methodologies. Now here I'll touch on two main things, right? Because most of the points we have discussed already, and I'm doing this in the interest of time, right? Now the first one being that you provide auditors with feedback about their performance to ensure that there's opportunities for improvement. Please, please, please. It is against the interest of internal audit and your staff if you hold out on them in providing feedback that could enable them improve performance prior to your end of year evaluations of performance, right? Then you just tell them, oh, I don't see your performance, you perform poorly, but you've not given them the opportunity to improve their performance over the period, right? So my recommendation will be that periodically and, preferably post each engagement, reserve some time for evaluation of performance, right? And it provides an opportunity for coaching staff to enable them move on to greater performance, right? Performance discussion should not be punitive, right? So it's very, very important that, we provide that opportunity, right? I'm getting notification we need to end here, but just quickly, give me about just 3 minutes to round up, right? Now, the chief audit executive evidence supervision is documented and retained. Now, in this era of the internet and technology, I have had instances where in Teams meetings, I have captured, right, the meeting to provide evidence that, there were review meetings. And of course, I raised review notes and files, right? But you could, explore that as well, right? And to end, the CAA is responsible for supervising engagements, right? Whether the engagement work is performed by the internal audit staff or by outsourced service providers, right? Now, although responsibility for supervision may be delegated, the CAE, and I repeat, the CAE retains ultimate responsibility, right? So if we are reneging on this, please, let's take notes. Let's not cede our responsibility for effective supervision of work and coaching of our staff for improved performance. On this note, I end here and take questions and comments for clarification.
Thank you very much, Mr. Michael Gbewonyo, for that great presentation on the overview of Global Internal Audit Standards, Domain 4. That is Managing the Internal Audit Function Principles 11 and 12. Thank you so, so much. So, our cherished members and ladies and gentlemen, the floor is open for questions and answers. Sorry, questions and then discussions. Hello. Kindly keep the questions concise so that we can address it soon. We are pressed with time, please.
Hello.
Yes. Please, I'm here. Can you hear me? Hello.
Hello, Stella, we can hear you.
Okay, so please kindly raise your hands and then we'll call you.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello, Michael, can you hear Stella?
Please, any question, comments, or suggestions?
Great.
Okay, that's a,
So are there questions or clarifications?
there's a question in the chat. There's a question in the chat, please.
Okay. Is it a question from Abigail Entry? She says, what is your view on pre-audit and CEO's interest involving internal audit team in pre-auditing? Mr. Gbewonyo, please, did you get that one? Or I should repeat it?
Okay, I see a question.
Yes.
What is your view on pre-audits and CEO's interest in involving internal audit in pre-audit activities?
Yes.
The key thing I would say is, you know, what your mandate provides for, right? If your mandate requires you perform pre-audits, certainly you can go ahead and perform pre-audits, right? But I would say the real value of internal audit is not in pre-audits, but in providing risk-based audits of the governance, risk, and controls processes, right? So that, you know, the real mandate of internal audit is given effect, right? By the way internal audit operates, you know, we are not to take or assume operational responsibilities, right? And pre-auditing is one that I would say, you know, fits very well with the management responsibility of ensuring that the controls that they have implemented works effectively, right? Now, I would substitute pre-audits with continuous controls auditing to ensure that the controls that have been implemented are adequate and working as they should, and rather capacitate management to assume the responsibility of ensuring that the right controls operate and they sign off having context of all the controls that have been implemented. I hope that clarifies.
Thank you, Mr. Gbewonyo. And Mr. Frederick Adongo Mahama, you want to know whether the presentation is going to be shared? Yes. Once you registered and joined the link, we are going to use the email address provided to share the
Please assist me
presentation with you.
Additional questions. Can't hear. That's my challenge.
Oh. Yes, Abigail Entry says she's okay with your submission. Thank you. Please, any more questions or contribution? Okay, Wisdom also have a contribution here. And he says pre-audit should be a first-line responsibility and not an IA responsibility. Thank you very much, Mr. Wisdom Duopo. Thank you. Any more questions or suggestions, please? Okay. So in the absence of, okay, I can see one new message here.
I can hear you now.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. All right.
Any further questions for me?
I think there is a question on whether certificates will be issued to participants for this session. Mrs. Brenda Mills-Papo, can you please address this?
Yes, normally those who attended are given CPD, so the secretariat will work on that.
Okay, thank you very much. And
Yeah,
then
and I see
Mr.
Edward say pre-auditing is an attestation of a weak control environment. Certainly so, Edward. And see, if let's what I would recommend is that let's build together with management the control environment gradually, and then we wean ourselves off pre-auditing and make management perform the audits, the role they're actually supposed to.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think so far we don't have any yes, there is a last contribution. So
I think
we have
2 of them or 3. Okay. How can internal wait.
I think some
talks about documenting engagement with juniors. Is it about taking minutes or in what form? Samuel, can you please clarify your question? I move on to, whilst waiting for your clarification, I move on to Samuel Apalbuating. How can internal auditors overcome undue influence from management? I believe this is one that deals with the tone at the top and requires clear and strong documentation of the audit charter, right? And it also requires, support from the board of directors, especially the chair of the audit committee, right? Now, one thing I'll tell you for sure also is that it requires an adept head of internal audit, right? Who can actually insist on the right thing being done, okay? And also continuously work with management to achieve the results of the organization, okay? Now, I would tell you that this is something I have faced, the earlier parts of my career. And it's also based on the maturity of the organization you work with, okay? Then also you're dealing with egos of people in high places, okay? I won't tell you to assuage the egos, know what you stand for, and insist on your rights as an internal auditor. But one thing I can tell you for sure also is that comes at a cost, okay? Because it gets to a point where you need to make a decision as to whether, it is worth pursuing your career with that particular organization if the control environment is that poor and people would not, take the right steps to enhance the control environment, okay? Eventually, I mean, if your engagements or your attempts at influencing, does not result in improvements in the environment for internal auditors to work, it becomes one that, you need to take a decision, right, on your future with that particular organization. But I will tell you to, first of all, start off with your charter, strengthen it, define your roles and responsibilities, what you are able to, what you cannot do, what reporting lines, should be in protecting the internal audit function, right? And insist on the right things being done, okay? Now, so I'm seeing a number of questions. In the interest of time, Brenda, can we take an approach of responding to the questions and then sharing with the community?
Yes, please. I
Yeah.
think we will resort to that as a measure so that we are able to stay within time.
Sure.
Because I think most of the concerns are bordering around pre-auditing. So the responses will come to the community. Thank you.
Sure.
So we are very grateful, Mr. Gbewonyo, for your time and your insightful presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we'll call on the president to give us the closing remarks.
Thanks very much, Michael. Thanks very much, Stella, for a great job done. Colleagues, because we're having some challenges earlier, I had to run us through some of the issues that we needed to bring to our attention. But I've realized that the number has increased. We've had quite a number of people joining ever since Michael started the presentation. So for that reason, I would run through, permit me if I happen to have repeated some of what I said earlier. If I happen to repeat some of what I said earlier. I wanted to bring to our attention that the 2024 Board CEO, CAE, and CEOs Forum would come off on the 19th of November at Movenpick. So I indicated that those of us who are interested in attending, we should be concluding our approval processes and registration processes. Because the earlier registrations we get, the better the preparations would be for that event. And I also indicated that right after that, come December, around the 14th, we would be having the Chief Audit Executives and CIA's Forum, with Council. And I was saying that for CAEs and CIAs on this call, or those that we know, please keep that date open. We want to meet as many of us as possible so that through the deliberations that we carry out there, we'll be able to identify better approaches to meeting the needs of our key stakeholders as internal audit practitioners. And I also said that the 2025 National Conference or Annual Conference will be taking place in April. In fact, in the course of the meeting, we concluded, we firmed up the date. It will be from the 15th to the 17th of April. So please, let's keep that one too in mind. And I reminded members that IIA, that is the 11th IIA conference, which comes off in Kigali. We've had communication on the pricing. For the IIA University, early bird rates are $200. Regular registration is $250. Then for Governance Forum, it is $400. Regular registration is $450. For the conference itself, it's $600 for early registration and $650 for regular registration. These are for members. Non-member rates are higher. We would send out a communication on all of this so that we will have the full information on this event as well. And I added that after the 11th IIA conference, we'll be having the international conference in Toronto, Canada. And for that one, we have already had discussions with Global. As you would know from Ghana, the Canadian visa processes are quite a lengthy process. There is a long queue. The last time I checked, the processing timeline is somewhere in excess of 180 days. And as time goes on, you just realize that that timeline will increase. But the intervention we have had from IIA is that, or the intervention we're coming up with is, there's been a discussion with the Canadian authorities. For members who will be registering, we would send out a communication as to all the kind of information that you would need to be able to apply for the visa so that it can be processed timely. But even with that, we would encourage that people who want to attend the international conference next year to be looking at submitting their visa applications by latest January. So that is how tight it is. We would want to see as many people as possible get their visas. and would want to facilitate the process, but we need a cooperation of everyone. And this one would not just be for you alone, but it would also be for all the other executives and board members or audit committee members that would be participating in that event. Then I also indicated that we are making preparations to roll out more of the curated or the global market training programs next year. So we should be on the lookout. The Certification and Professional Development Committee will be sending out, I trust they will be able to send out the training program for next year early enough, so that, early enough this year or later this year, so that we all prepare to attend those events. And once we have those courses, we can run them not only in Accra, but also at other venues, so that we bring the services much closer to all of you. Then I would still encourage members that towards about the developments in the profession, serving on the African Governance Recognition and Advocacy Committee, Regulatory Committee, we have had approval from the Global Board for us to proceed with some of the work that we are doing. First and foremost, to increase the awareness about the institute, the institute and the profession amongst regulatory, government, as well as, by that I mean central government. And then also there are plans towards drafting templates, that is regulatory or, regulatory drafting templates. We're working on that. And I'm sure as soon as that is rolled out, it will make those of us who've been asking when an act will be ready, as soon as those are rolled out, it will make it easier for us to progress and make some quick progress on seeking the legislation for the institute. So it's just to say that there's a lot of work that is going on around that angle too. Whilst we are on those, we've just had a presentation on the standards. What I will encourage members to do is for them to make their visits to the Institute's website, to increase the number of times they visit the Institute's website. So much content is being churned out that we cannot be forwarding it to members. We cannot be forwarding all of that content to members. So you will realize that lately we will share the links, we share links so that you can go to the website. And when you are done looking at what you went there for, you would also notice that there are other things that are other useful content that you can leverage upon to do your work more successfully. I know a lot of the guides, the global guides, are being rolled out. Just recently, that for networks was rolled out. We already had that for auditing organizational culture rolled out. We had that for, there were quite other ones that were rolled out earlier. So please, you need to visit there to make good use of this content. Unfortunately, a lot of that content, some of these content or much of it is for members only. So what I will advise is that we need to desist from the download and share. We need to desist from that, because doing so is a violation of your ethical standards with the Institute. So let's just be guided by those, but we have it there, we can utilize it to do our work very effectively. And aside that, there are also podcasts and there are other video recordings on topical areas that you can do macro learning on, with. You can access them and use them to learn so that we all stay afresh on all these efforts that the Institute is making to help us. Having said this, I think I would like to see the ground and just thank the Certification and Professional Development Committee for putting this together. We are most grateful for the services. And once again, Michael, thanks very much for offering to share such knowledge with us. I'm most grateful. Stella, you can take it over.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I can see a few hands raised. Please type in your question and then they will be addressed through the community WhatsApp page. Sorry, we are behind time, so we are unable to address
Stella, maybe just in case, maybe you want to clarify if it is something about what I have said that can be responded to quickly, we will do that. Otherwise, then we respond to them later.
All right, then Mr. Muhammad Kanara, does your concern relate to what Mr. President just made? Please go
Yes,
ahead with
madam.
your, okay, please let's
Yes,
hear you.
wanted to find out, with the use of our membership page, there are some of the programs that when you want to open, not for downloading, but to open and then learn, it's not opening. They tell you they want network executive members only. How do we, assess those ones too?
Yes, network executive members only is reserved. There is a subscription that it can we can facilitate for you to subscribe to that. You will notice that for network executives, there is they've specified the amount that you can pay to join that. But at an institute level, we have not yet been able to create the package, because to do that, we would need a number of people who would want to do it so that we can then negotiate to get a better deal. Presently, as it is, the fee is quite high. So if you have any issues with that kind of content, unfortunately, you cannot download it. You cannot even open it. That's unfortunate.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome. Stella, if you are speaking, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. Yes, so there was an earlier person who also raised their hand. If it has to do with what Mr. President put across, kindly let's hear you so that he can address it quickly for us to close the program. Hello. Okay, so all right.
Hello.
So please.
I have a question, please.
Okay.
Please, I think there was something that was said about the registration, extension of the registration for the challenge exams. Can you throw more light on that for us, please?
Yes, please. I said that the challenge exam, that is for qualified accountants and CISA credential holders, the challenge exam registration period ended on 30th September. However, I said I was picking signals that there was an extension to the 9th of October. I am yet to get confirmation on it. Once I get confirmation, we will send out the notification on the extension to all members, please. But maybe just related to that is the fact that come Saturday, that is just this Saturday, we are starting the CIA review classes for those who have registered to write the challenge exam. Remember, kindly recall that, kindly hear it right. Those who have registered, unfortunately, if you've not registered but are interested, you cannot do what we call auditing of the course. You cannot attend because the terms under which we are to use the tuition material is that you should have been a student. You should be a student, a registered candidate, or a registered candidate before you can attend the classes. So we are starting. If you've registered and you have not yet committed to attending the classes, you might just want to contact the Secretariat for further clarification and then express your interest if you would want to do so you can join us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. There is Gifty Efri Fanyami. She wants to know that with regards to the international conference, when can interested participants start the process?
Stella, I lost you a bit. When can interested what?
Participants start the process. I think the registration and others.
Okay, so from our discussion with Global, it was obvious, it became clear that we needed to finalize a few things. One of them has to do with the rate. Once the rate is approved, because there's been a recommendation for the rate. Once it's approved, we would actually urge members to start the process. But if you want a ballpark figure, I would say maybe look at what was charged this year and probably add $150 to $200 on that, and use that as your target, a range for your register. I mean, for the purposes of this. But as I said, we will send out, once we get these things firmed up from Global, we will send out a full communication to guide members as to how to go about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you so much, participants and dear members, for your time. And Mr. Gbewonyo, we are very grateful for that insightful presentation once again. So we'll call on any member touched to give us the closing prayer. Any volunteer, please, for closing prayer.
Shall we pray?
Okay.
We are grateful to you, O Lord, for the wonderful time we've had with you, and the wonderful presentation given to us. We pray that whatever we have discussed, whatever we've learned, will be part and parcel of our daily works. God, be with us, be with our facilitator, be with our leadership. Let whatever they do be a success in Jesus' name. Take us through this week. Take us through the year, the weeks ahead of us. And whatever we do, may your name be glorified. In Jesus' name, have we prayed with thanksgiving. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much,
So
Mr.
just to
Richmond
confirm,
Chami.
Stella, and for the benefit of all of those still on call, I confirm that the registration period has been extended to the 9th of October. So we'll send out a communication on that for the benefit of those who would want to take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And thank you very much, every one of you, for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.